All right, in the last hour we created a data model using a pretty slick little tool, pretty easy tool to use at least, and probably pretty powerful if we dug into all of its components to show, almost said Siri, to show iOS how I want my data laid out for this app. This is not necessarily how this lays out in the database. I'm sure it's not. And during the break, we were talking about how do I look inside the SQLite database itself, see how it's structured. There are apps for that. You can also use command line. And I've forgotten to go back in and look to see if it's a big one table database or if it's multi-tables. Doesn't seem to matter. We're creating views here. And behind the scenes, core data and MySQL communicate to say, yeah, I can do that. I can link those together. Those are linked. To make our life a little easier, however, we also want to have, I'm going to call them wrapper classes or helper classes that correlate to this. Now we're talking about Swift classes, just like we've built before, with properties that correlate to this so that we can take the data out of these, put them into a class, manipulate the class, and then put them back in here again. So that's our next phase here, is to create classes to help us with those. We did the relationships. Remember, Apple recommends doing them in both directions. I didn't talk about it, but there's also a delete rule. If we delete a record in one table, what do we do to the other one? Usually we null it out. I think that's the default, but you could say cascade to delete. Now the wrapper classes. If we look at this in the database, or in the, we've created this, if we go into the master detail, is that where, no, it's just clicking on these. Notice the type is a managed object. That's pretty generic. What we really want is something that we can manipulate. And the good news is iOS Xcode can help us with that. A strongly typed class instead of a very generically typed class. We do this a lot. And even in the old version, Xcode included a utility to help us do that. So what I'm going to do is select the bank info table. It doesn't really matter which one you select. And then create a new class object, new file. The key here is to use core data, because this is an object that correlates to core data. And then we're going to create a subclass of the managed object that we just saw. Next, failed banks is the database, sounds good, or the model, probably the data model that we just created. Which tables do we want? I think, or which views? I think I want both. There's a side effect of doing both, but we can fix it very quickly. Next, where do you want to put this? Now here you have to be careful. The language is Objective-C. We want Swift. I believe once we do this in the core data saving stuff, it'll remember it. But first time, make sure that it's the right one. And we only need to target the failed banks app. So we should be good. Create. And now over here, it's created two classes, bank dates and bank info, that each have a corresponding field with the appropriate type. The NS managed here basically means the core data is going to take care of creating these, declaring them, instantiating them when we need them, and it'll also do the garbage collection and get rid of them a little quicker than maybe garbage collection would normally do. And notice that the relationship between bank dates and bank info has already been defined with the appropriate class, bank info. But if we go to the bank info class, I suspect, and I'm right for a change, that this one didn't transfer over. It's still pointing to an NS managed object. That will cause us a little bit of grief later. So let's change that to bank dates. So that it has the right type. Because we picked them both at the same time, it created one and then said, I don't have anything to relate this to. I don't know of anything called bank date, so it couldn't do it. Then it built the bank dates type and it said, oh, I'm supposed to be related to bank info. Oh, I have one of those. And so it was that chicken and the egg thing. In this case, bank info was the egg or the chicken.
I got it the other way around.
Yep. Doesn't matter. But if you select both of them at the same time, then you have to remember to do that. You can, and the last year is the way we did it. We picked one, created it, and then clicked on the other table, or view, excuse me, and went back and did it again, created another class, and it created that one, and it does both of them properly. Can't. Still can't do it. So it's a quick fix. But you have to remember to make that fix, otherwise you don't have access to the properties of bank dates when you're inside of bank info, and you might want that. So now we have two objects that we can manipulate a little bit later. All right, now we're getting into the gray areas here. This works. Doesn't cause any runtime errors, but the last time I ran it, it didn't work. And I might, if we have time, I might go back to my old notes and dig them up and see if we can make them work, but there's some translation that needs to happen because it's still written in Objective-C. These notes I've updated so that they're written in Swift, at least to the point where we get to today, and I'll continue to update them. So now what we need to do is get data from the database and put it in the scratchpad in the context. This is done using an NS fetched controller class, which is already inside our master detail view. So if you go inside the master detail view, you'll find another mark for the fetched results controller. And again, this is new. This fetched results controller is another class built into the language that manages all this, go get the data and give me access to it via the context. It's related to the context at some point. So we have some tweaking to do here. First of all, notice event and notice timestamp. That can't be right. True enough. So we're going to have to make some changes there. Note that the template already includes the fetched results controller, the fetched results controller method. I thought I changed that. This kind of looks like a method, but it's really a variable that has stuff inside it. So it's kind of one of those calculated properties. It's a calculated property, and it's got some pretty hairy looking kind of calculations going on. So whether it's a method or a property, or I called it a variable last year it was a variable. But now we have these calculated properties. I think that's what this is. But bottom line is we got all this code that has to happen, and we need to tweak it a little bit to make it work for our application. The NS fetch request, one of the first things it builds. Here's the NS fetch request. It's basically a query that says, go get me all that data. Behind the scenes, this, I think, translates into a select command. We have to tell it which entity to request from. It also has some stuff that said, and I'll see if I can get these both on the screen at the same time here. How many do we want to get at a time? We don't want to mess with that. That number, how many we want to get, is determined by the number of rows inside our table view adapter. And it was set for us appropriately. So this is going to get 20 records at a time. And somehow this fetch request controller is going to take care of, I need some more, I need some more. He's scrolling 100 miles an hour. Hurry up, give me some more. It's going to take care of all that. And then down here, we also have to define how do we want the data sorted when we get it. And what's nice is all we have to do is grab the field. So a lot of this is built for us. Try and check in my notes here if I say to do it right away. Nope, don't have any instructions. Those are coming later. We're just talking about it. And then it instantiates a fetch controller down here, gets it going. And if there's any problems, throws an error. This all links to the context though. So once again, everything's going to be tied to our context. There it is. Everything's tied to our context. That's again our scratch pad where we can get the data. As always, we get a view did load. That we saw before. View did load gives us an add button that we might have to override. Same way we did before, a left button that lets us delete stuff. All of this stuff is already coded. As Nick found out, we can add times, close the app, run it again later, and that time is still there. Our persistent data is there. The delete option probably works. Unfortunately, all it does right now is add time, so we need to make it a little bit smarter. Here's the insert. If we look at that, notice it's a managed object, and it does the entity descriptions, and it uses the fetched result. That's a little different than last time. All right, when we looked at insert object last time, it was our job to tie it to a database and to an array. Or to an array, excuse me. In this case, most of the code's already there. It uses the fetched results controller that takes care of all the bringing in of times and dates as it is now, and will hopefully bring in our failed banks. The view did load also makes use of, might be getting ahead of myself here, configure view. Where did that go? Oh, here we go. All this stuff looks pretty much the same, right? Configure a cell, fetched, but notice now, how many sections does the fetched results controller have? We can have multiple sections in our fetched results, I guess so. Notice we don't, it just used to be a 2 the last time we looked, and now it's go get it out of the fetched results controller. If we want to know the number of rows per section, we get that number that we saw down below, the 20. And then here we define once again the cells. Same way we did before. So some of these things, configure cell does a lot of the details for us. So a lot of these things are very similar to the way they were before, but they're now all tied into this fetched results controller. And the good news is we don't have to do a whole lot to configure that. So I want to fill the table now from core data. I need to look in the AppDelegate, so I'm going to see if I can follow along here and do both at the same time. Did finish loading with options. It's the very first one, right there. So I'm in the AppDelegate, very first function, did finish loading. Defines our managed object. Here it is. And then if we go to the master view controller, it has its own link to that. At the very top, it has a managed object context. So our AppDelegate's taking care of that. If I'm going to have a table view that shows data from a database, I need a managed context. So the AppDelegate does all the processing of that, but we have a link to it to the master view controller to say, I can tell you to do that from here. So the delegate is taking care of that. It's the same table view controller. We just launched it a little while ago, right? It looks exactly the same as the one we did in Unit 5. Except this one, the delegate has more power. It has the ability to tie to a database. The AppDelegate takes care of that for us. Just need to tweak it. And now we're going into that back to the fetched results controller, which is at near the bottom of the master view controller. And this is what we were looking at a little while ago. And we need to change the entity name here. This one's bank info. This is our view. Which view are you going to use to gather data? Pardon me?
Is it case sensitive?
You can test it later. I don't know if it's case sensitive. I would guess probably. It's my gut feel, but I hope it is. Then I can finally stare at you all and say, see, I told you it's important to make your table names and your field names and everything consistent across the board. Now, how do we want these sorted? So that when they come into our table view, they're sorted appropriately. Let's sort by name. And this says ascending false, which is interesting. It's the first place I've ever seen where ascending is defaulted to false.
I guess because it's dated.
True. Good point. It didn't make the recording, obviously, because I barely heard it. But his point is, when we first came in here, what was in the entry? It was just a date time, right? And if we're sorting by date times, iOS was smart enough, at least in the skeleton, to say, you probably want the most recent one first. So maybe that's why. In any case, change it to true or leave it alone if that's what you wish. And then we need to go to configure cell, which I believe is up there. It is one higher. Now, one of the things it says on the side here that we haven't done yet is I want to change my prototype cell. You learned how in Unit 5 to create a custom one. I'm not going to take the time to do that here. But I do want to change the prototype cell, so let's go back to the main storyboard real quick. Thinking. And the first thing I'm going to do is turn off this auto layout stuff so that when we get back to it later, it won't get in my way. So I'm going over here to the file inspector. Is that the right name of that thing? Yep. And I'm going to turn off the auto layout. I shared with a couple of you during the labs last week that I'm sure this works pretty well once you get your head around it, but I just have not had time to dig into that auto layout to see what all the stuff means. Notice how big my table view controller is. It's very wide. If I put stuff in there and this will probably work fine right now until we get to the details view. It'll work fine in a phone 6. But Brittany had trouble where stuff was off the page, and others have had trouble. If you don't set this up right, it doesn't adjust to different devices very well. And that's its purpose, is to generate one layout that adjusts to multiple devices. For right now, it's causing me more grief than it is helping me, so I'm going to turn off the auto layout. Now everybody goes back to the iPhone 6 size. One of the things I also discovered is grabbing the prototype cells is tough to click on sometimes. I think I got it there. If you're not sure, turn on the outline view. It's this little guy down here at the bottom. And there, I did get it. Select the cell. And let's go to its properties. And instead of a basic cell, I want to have a basic cell with a subtitle. So now I have a title that's one font size and a subtitle that's a different font size. So now I have 2 lines, and I can have the bank name on one line and the city, state, zip on the other line if that's what I want, or any combination thereof, depending on what we put into now our master view configure. Now hopefully that's stuck. It did. Okay. So here's my configure cell. Configure cell says go get me the object from the fetched results controller that is at this index path. So there's our friend the index path again, which says I clicked on this row in the grid. But instead of getting it out of an array, this says go get me the object out of the fetched results review controller. First thing we need to do is change the type of that, because I expect that to be a bank info object. Bank dates don't get collected yet, not until we ask for them. When we go to the details view, then those are going to get sucked in. So what I expect is when I click on that, I'm going to get some bank info. And now down here, because this is a bank info, I can start bringing in some bank info stuff like the name. And at this point, before we do the subtitle, let's run.
Do we need to delete?
Pardon me?
Do we need to delete the file to make it be?
That's what we're going to do. When I run, it will build successfully, but it will crash when it tries to run.
I know.
Yours did because you already modified it. You already ran it once. Waiting for mine to come back up and crash. I'm gonna hit the pause button, that way it'll go right to it. Mine's crashing in a different place. I'm sure most of you are crashing on this abort statement down here, so that if, or not insert, but in the app delegate, I think there's another abort. If it can't find your app, it kind of gets stuck in here, or where's the other one? Here. Okay. And you get stuck on that line, it says it can't run it. Well, this goes back to that error that I mentioned very early on in the first recording. Whenever you change the layout of the views, the data on your simulator doesn't adjust to that. So we have to delete the app from the simulator. I'm hoping it's going to clean up my error as well. And so here's my app on the simulator. To get rid of it, you just push and hold until it starts jiggling. Then close. Or delete, maybe. You sure? Yep. Now it's gone. And if you press Command-Shift-H, that's the home button. If you're an iPad or iPhone user, you know that gets the jiggling to stop. Or you can go to the hardware up here and just hit the home button from there. So now my app is gone. If you run it again, you should at least get an empty table. Something's wrong with my simulator, so I'm going to kill it all together and launch it again. Okay, so sorry, I'm laughing at a little joke off on the side here. I did get it to finally run. I had to kill my, if you get that error that you saw in the recording, some other error was, well, it didn't even go to the code. There was something wrong with my simulator. I just killed it, launched it again, and it started up again. But where are my failed banks? Okay. My suspicion is that we have not yet copied this SQLite database into our data directory. That did not happen automatically. That data did not get copied. Since it didn't get copied, we're seeing an empty database right now. It's a bank database. We could add banks to it, but we don't have a detail screen that allows us to do that, so we can't do that either. And right now, I think if I click plus, we'd still get some times in here, but I wonder where they would go if they even did that. Okay, so we have a slight problem. And the problem is my data didn't get in there. And before we leave, the other thing I want to do, and maybe you can help me with this because we're now at the point where I started struggling because it wasn't working. I want to get back into my configure views. So that's the master view controller. I think it was that one.
Configure cell.
Configure, the one we were just in, where was it?
Where's that?
There it is, configure cell. Okay. There should be a way for me to get to the detail item. Cell dot detail text label. That's the subtitle. Dot text equals, and I'm guessing I'm going into the same object. Oh, wait a minute.
So you need an exclamation point.
Value for key name, get its description. Value for key. I'm guessing this is the field name. I could be wrong, so I'm going to grab the city. Dot description. I think. No, they let it go. Okay, I did get. I guess I did get this far.
But then we don't have any data.
But we still don't have any data. But at least now I have the code in here, so when I do get data, I should be able to see the name of the bank that failed and underneath it the city that it came from. And again, these can be tweaked. The point here is the detailed text label should get you to the subtext if you want that subtitle type stuff.
Why is there no syntax highlighted?
I needed a exclamation point for the detailed text label.
Maybe before or after?
Oh, right after.
Here?
Yeah.
I needed a question mark press on the old.
Yeah, if it's an older version of Xcode,
I have the most recent. I just haven't updated to membranes. But
yep, it just failed. UI label does not have a member named text. Okay, UI label. Let's do that then.
Yeah, you did need it, okay. Sometimes it tells you before it happens.
And sometimes it tells you after. Yep. So that was the solution. And that's where I got stuck in class. So at this point, I'm going to turn off the recording and save it. And I'm going to see if you can help me solve getting the data into the database. If we do, then we'll turn the recording back on and figure out and save that. So recording off for a while.